Wealthy CEO shocked by job applicants' triplets. Hey everyone. Welcome back to Alcott Stories, where emotions run deep and every story touches the heart. Today's episode is one you'll never forget. What happens when a homeless mother walks into a CEO's office? Not just for a job, but with triplets by her side. Will he throw her out? Or will secrets from the past flip both their worlds upside down? Stick around, because what starts as a job interview turns into a shocking journey of love, betrayal, and second chances you didn't see coming. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. You don't want to miss the next emotional roller coaster we have for you. The wind howled through the steel canyons of Manhattan, flinging icy rain against Sarah's thin jacket as she stood motionless before the skyscraper that towered like a judgmental giant above her trembling frame. Her once pristine resume, now damp and curling at the edges, trembled in her hands. But her grip never faltered, not even as her fingers turned red from the cold. The stroller at her side squeaked slightly as her triplets shifted, shivering under a single worn blanket, their breaths fogging the plastic cover while their wide eyes scanned a world they didn't yet understand. Sarah's heart ached at the sight of their little chins quivering in silence, but she swallowed the lump in her throat because this moment wasn't about pain, it was about purpose. Her boots, scuffed and soaked, had walked through shelters, rejection, and sleepless nights, and yet she stood taller now than she ever did in the comfort of her old life. 3 years ago she had a sparkling diamond on her finger, a nursery-painted sunshine yellow, and a future brimming with promises. But that was before the man she trusted turned his back, before love vanished in silence, and before motherhood became a battlefield she fought on her own. She remembered the eviction notice pinned to her door like a scarlet letter, the bank's cold voice on the phone, the way she whispered lullabies in train stations to keep the triplets calm through the night. Sarah had cried herself hoarse in public restrooms and smiled through hunger just to make her children laugh. Today, though, was different. Today, she wore determination like armor. Her eyes, though sunken from exhaustion, still held a quiet fire, one that refused to be extinguished by pity or circumstance. She gazed at her reflection in the glass doors of Johnson Tech and barely recognized the woman, staring back, not because she looked weak, but because she looked unbreakable. Her hair, long and wet from rain, clung to her cheeks like ink stains, but she didn't brush it back. There was no room for vanity when survival was at stake. One of the triplets whimpered, and she leaned down to kiss his forehead, whispering a promise not for his ears, but for her own trembling heart. Mama's not giving up. As she stepped forward, people in tailored suits stared at her with mild discomfort, unsure if she was lost, delusional, or desperate. None of them knew she had once graduated top of her class, that she could code complex systems and speak in boardroom lingo with the best of them. They only saw the tired mother in thrift store heels, and that was fine. She didn't need them to believe in her. She only needed one yes, just one. The security guard hesitated, eyeing the children, but she showed him her interview email with grace, not shame, and he nodded, allowing her in with the stiff professionalism that couldn't quite hide his curiosity. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Sarah took a deep breath, calming the triplets with a soft song while the numbers above blinked upward like a countdown to either redemption or ruin. The silence inside the lift was deafening, broken only by the hum of the lights and the tiny yawns of her babies who had known too many cold nights and not enough lullabies. When the elevator dinged at the 38th floor, Sarah straightened her back, wiped a tear from her cheek without letting it fall, and stepped into a marble-floored lobby where success had a scent, polished leather, designer cologne, and faint undertones of power. Receptionist looked up in confusion, eyes flicking from her to the triplets as though waiting for security to escort her out. But she offered them a confident nod, stated her name, and confirmed her appointment. They called upstairs, and the line between amusement and disbelief in their voices did not faze her. She stood still, clutching her soaked folder and the stroller, like shields in a war she had already won by simply arriving. When she was finally led to the office, she whispered to the children. "Be brave with me," before stepping through the wide glass doors. The office was sleek, modern, filled with art that cost more than she had made in years. And seated behind a glass desk was the man himself, Alexander Johnson. He was every inch the image of success. Crisp navy suit, tailored to perfection. His blue eyes sharp beneath. A well-groomed beard that framed a jaw built for command. He looked up, clearly not expecting what he saw, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She met his gaze with the steadiness of a woman who had walked through hell and arrived intact. She could feel the triplets shift behind her, peeking shyly from beneath the blanket, and still she didn't look away. In that quiet moment, drenched and shivering in a glass kingdom of power, Sarah did not feel small. She felt seen. She wasn't here to beg for mercy or charity. She was here because she knew her worth. And somehow, without a word, the storm outside paused in reverence. Alexander blinked, the faintest flicker of surprise breaking. The ice in his normally unreadable expression as the woman before him stood soaked, dignified and entirely unapologetic, her 3 small children clinging to the folds of her, coat like living shadows of a story he hadn't read yet. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It pulsed with tension, judgment, curiosity, and something else neither of them could name. He tapped his pen against the desk, leaned back in his leather chair, and studied her with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for business deals. Not dripping women with trembling toddlers. Her scent, the faint blend of rainwater, baby powder, and something wild, like hope that refused to die, lingered in the air between them. Sarah straightened her spine even more, refusing to adjust the children clinging to her knees, as if every wrinkle in her clothing, every shiver in her limbs, and every tear at the edge of her resume spoke the truth she wouldn't sugarcoat. Alexander's lips parted, his tone teetering between arrogance and disbelief as he asked if she'd confused his office with a daycare, his eyebrow arching like a silent challenge. But her reply, steady and sharp, cut through the marble silence like thunder. "It's both. Because life doesn't wait for perfect timing." Her voice didn't crack, not even under the weight of his gaze that had shaken stronger people. And for a second, he didn't know how to respond, because this wasn't the kind of woman who begged for chances. This was the kind who dared the world to deny her. He motioned for her to sit, eyes flicking between her and the children who remained still but wide-eyed, sensing the importance of this moment. She guided them to a corner of the room, handed them a snack from her bag with military precision, and sat across from him with the poise of someone who'd been told no 100 times but still dressed for a yes. Her resume was wet, but her words were clear, calculated, confident. She spoke about her years in project management, her tech certifications, the gap in her employment due to childbirth, and how she stayed updated through online courses and freelance gigs done by candlelight in shelters while her kids slept. Alexander listened, at first only half engaged, but slowly. She reeled him in, not with desperation, but data, insight, poise, and grit. The clock ticked, but he didn't interrupt. His fingers stopped tapping. He leaned forward, captivated by a woman whose brilliance glowed brighter than any corner office candidate in a pressed suit. Still, he couldn't stop looking at the children, their tiny hands grasping crackers, their quiet cooperation too disciplined for their age. And he wondered how many nights they'd gone without warmth to be so still in chaos. "You're qualified," he finally said. But his tone was laced with hesitation, the unspoken concern lingering in the air like smoke. How would she manage the demands of this role? With 3 toddlers in tow? Sarah saw it in his eyes, the calculation. The doubt, not cruel, just practical, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in, eyes locking with his. "You want to know if I can handle the pressure?" she asked, not waiting for his nod. "Try surviving on cold oatmeal and a broken stroller, while coding reports with one hand and rocking a baby with the other. Pressure isn't new to me." For a moment, Alexander felt something twist in his chest, something unfamiliar and unwanted, a flash of guilt, maybe, or memory, or some forgotten humanity that rose like dust from an old attic. He stood and walked toward the window, hiding his thoughts behind the city skyline. Trying to shake the strange recognition her eyes stirred, Sarah waited, not pressing, not pleading, just present, as calm as a storm that had learned to be silent. He turned back, noticing now the slight tremor in her soaked clothes, the smudge of fatigue under her eyes, the quiet strength in the way she held herself. He couldn't figure her out, and that unsettled him more than her presence. "Why this company?" he asked finally, his voice clipped. "Why not a charity? A part-time gig? Why aim this high?" Her answer came without pause. "Because my children deserve to see me win. Not survive, win. And because I don't accept scraps when I bring value." Something about the fire in her answer cracked his armor a little more. This wasn't a plea. It was a statement. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt like he was on the receiving end of someone else's power. He studied her in silence, trying to convince himself that this was just another case study in ambition. Another woman trying to make it in a man's world, but deep down, something about her felt different, too familiar, too sharp, too unforgettable. He called in his assistant to bring hot cocoa for the kids, surprising even himself, and the triplets perked up with quiet glee, their tiny hands gripping the warm cups like they held treasure. Sarah whispered thank you but didn't smile. She knew this wasn't kindness. It was a test, and she wasn't here for favors. She was here to claim what was already hers. As Alexander dismissed her with the promise of a follow-up, she stood, gathered her children, and walked out with the same quiet strength she'd carried in, leaving the scent of rain, motherhood, and challenge lingering in the room. He sat back in his chair, her words replaying like echoes, because in that office of glass and steel, where deals were measured in millions, Sarah's presence had weighed heavier than profit. And he wasn't sure if he had just met a problem, a miracle, or the beginning of a storm he couldn't control. The conference room, once a pristine space of power and precision, was now tinged with the unpredictable chaos of motherhood as Sarah tried to maintain professionalism while her triplets, clearly exhausted from hours without rest, became living proof of her daily reality. Jack's tiny wails bounced off the walls like alarms, his face scrunched in frustration as he kicked his small feet against the stroller bar, while Jill accidentally knocked over the juice box she'd been carefully sipping, the liquid seeping into the rug like a quiet rebellion against order. Jim, the quietest of the three, refused to let go of Sarah's arm, his little fingers clutching her sleeve with the kind of desperation only a child who's been through too much could express without words. Alexander shifted uncomfortably in his seat, used to silence, order, and adult conversation. Not the bubbling unpredictability of children, but something about the scene made him pause instead of react. Sarah didn't raise her voice, didn't flinch, didn't apologize for the way life burst through the seams of her best behavior. She simply reached for tissues from her purse, calmly wiped up the spill, and held Jim with one hand while finishing her sentence. About her leadership role in a volunteer tech nonprofit, her composure in the chaos was louder than any credential. Alexander reached for his water, needing something to do with his hands, trying to focus on her words. But then something caught his eye, something small, shining faintly around Jim's neck. It was a locket, old and slightly worn, the gold dulled with time, but unmistakable in design, engraved with a delicate pattern he could never forget. A single heartbeat passed, then another as he leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing, his breath catching. That locket! He had given it away 6 years ago in a moment of love, so intense it nearly terrified him. It had been a private gesture, a promise in metal, gifted to a woman who once meant everything before they lost touch, before everything fell apart. He cleared his throat, forcing his eyes away, but now his mind was in a storm. Could this be coincidence? Could there be two Sarahs with the same gentle command in their voice? The same eyes that once looked at him like he was more than just potential. He glanced again, and this time it hit him harder. The child's eyes, wide and unflinching, were an echo of his own reflection, an eerie resemblance that made the air between them heavier. Suddenly, everything about her felt familiar, not in the way strangers sometimes do, but like memory rediscovered under dust. Sarah, unaware of his internal spiral, continued answering his next question about project turnaround timelines. But he barely heard her now. The edges of her voice blurred as he stared at the triplets. Really stared, noticing how Jack had his frown, how Jill tilted her head the same way his mother used to when deep in thought, how Jim's quiet observation mirrored the way he dissected the world. Alexander's throat tightened, and for the first time in years he felt unsteady. He interrupted, voice softer than intended. "That necklace, where did he get that?" Sarah paused just for a second, then turned to Jim and gently tucked the locket under his shirt. "It's an old family keepsake," she said, her tone even, her gaze unreadable, and Alexander could see her building a wall in real time, brick by brick. He wanted to believe it was all in his head, that his mind was pulling ghosts from the past. But the timeline lined up too perfectly, the way she held herself, the sharpness of her mind, even the subtle cadence of her speech. It was all too familiar. Memories surfaced uninvited. A summer on the university lawn, shared coffee on chilly mornings, fingers laced beneath library desks, a whispered dream of a future they never got to live. He had tried to reach out back then, but life swept him into fast money and faster decisions, and one day she was just gone. Could she have vanished with his children and never told him? Why? He watched her tuck a strand of damp hair behind her ear and realized she was still protecting something. Not just the kids, but perhaps her heart, her past, herself. The triplets grew louder, and Alexander's assistant peeked in with a questioning look. But he waved her off. He wasn't ready to end this meeting. Not yet, not with this much unsaid. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes fixed on Sarah like she held answers to questions he hadn't dared ask in years. Did we know each other?" he asked, each word weighted, careful. Sarah blinked once, then twice, and for the briefest moment, her eyes shimmered not from tears, but from the burden of a truth she had buried beneath resilience. "We met a long time ago," she said softly, and nothing else. But in that silence, in that careful omission, he heard everything, the possibility, the ache, the history. The room was still, the children humming in soft, messy play behind her, unaware that the truth had already begun to unravel. Alexander couldn't decide if he was angry, confused, or terrified. But one thing was certain, nothing about this interview was ordinary anymore. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the resume again, this time not to evaluate her qualifications, but to find traces of a woman he may have once loved and the life he never knew he'd left behind. As Sarah stood to collect her children, her voice was strong, but her eyes lingered on his a beat too long, as if waiting for him to remember who they were before life made them strangers. As Sarah walked away, her back straight and children in tow, Alexander remained frozen in his chair, the polished glass of his office, suddenly blurring with the weight of memories crashing over him like a broken dam. The door had barely clicked shut when he rose abruptly, heart pounding with a chaos he hadn't felt in years, limbs stiff with shock, chest tight with something deeper than disbelief. It was the weight of truth colliding with the past. He had buried beneath ambition. He stepped out of the room, murmured a quick excuse to his assistant, and ducked into his private office, locking the door behind him, as if the truth might stop knocking if he hid well enough. His hands gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white, breath uneven. The locket, her voice, the way Jim stared at him, it was all too much. The room swirled around him like a carousel of memories, and before he knew it, he was back at university, a younger version of himself with a crooked smile and a heart still tender. Sarah had been his entire world then, brilliant, wild, grounded, and real. They would sneak out of lectures to lie under campus trees, sharing dreams like secrets and building castles in the air. She had believed in him before anyone else did. She edited his essays, challenged his business plans, kissed him like she saw the man he would become even when he couldn't, and he had promised her the world. But when the overseas internship arrived, an opportunity that could change his life, he had hesitated, not because of the distance, but because the moment he told her, her smile faltered. She had whispered that they'd make it work, and he had believed her. The flight came. He left, emails slowed. Her letters never arrived. He thought she had moved on. He never knew what really happened until now. His assistant, back then, had been cold, possessive, always overstepping lines he never clearly drew. He remembered how she would scoff at Sarah's name, roll her eyes when he talked about her, and once even suggested Sarah was holding him back. But he had been too distracted by success to notice the poison in the air. His chest tightened as he realized how blind he'd been, how easily he had let someone else's narrative replace his own truth. What if those letters were hidden? What if every message Sarah sent, every cry for help, every confession of fear and love, had been blocked, deleted, silenced? And worse, what if she had believed he had done the same to her? He turned toward the window, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he no longer recognized. What was the point of all this wealth, these titles, these power plays, if he had unknowingly abandoned the only thing that ever truly mattered? The triplets, his triplets. His children had grown up without knowing his voice, his hands, his heartbeat. They had learned to walk, to speak, to laugh and cry, all without him. And not because he walked away, but because he had been kept away. Rage surged, not at Sarah, but at himself, for not questioning sooner, for letting silence stand where love once lived. Images of Sarah, pregnant, alone, terrified, flashed through his mind, and the guilt nearly knocked him to his knees. He imagined her staring at a phone that never rang, opening a mailbox that stayed empty, sleeping in a cold room with only hope to keep her warm. And yet she never begged. She never chased. She raised those children on her own, carried 3 lives, and still walked into his office like a warrior, not a victim. That kind of strength wasn't learned. It was forged in fire. Alexander clenched his jaw, his heart now a storm of questions. Did she hate him? Had she cried for him at night while holding her belly? Did she curse his name in hospital corridors? Had she told the children about him, or shielded them from a ghost? He ran his hand through his hair, once a symbol of his control, now tangled with helplessness. He wanted to scream, to call her back in, to demand answers, but something told him she had no more words to offer him unless he earned them. All this time, he thought she'd left him behind, but it was he who had left her defenseless, unknowingly complicit in a betrayal that had rewritten both their fates. He stared at his own reflection in the window, eyes hollow, beard neatly trimmed, suit worth more than what she likely survived on for months. And yet he had never felt poorer than he did now. Behind him, the office phone rang, but he didn't move. The world could wait. For the first time in years, Alexander Johnson wasn't thinking about deals or deadlines. He was thinking about a woman who once trusted him with her future and a truth that had turned his empire into ashes. Somewhere down the hall, the faint echo of children's laughter floated back toward him, soft and haunting, and he knew, no matter what came next, he would never be the same man again. The following morning, Alexander didn't sleep. He barely blinked. The weight of truth had kept him pacing through the night, surrounded by walls that echoed his silence louder than any storm. When he finally picked up the phone, his fingers trembled not from weakness, but from the overwhelming need to confront what he had lost and what he might never get back. Sarah answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious, clipped, like she was bracing herself for another door to slam. "Meet me," he said, not as a CEO, not as a man used to control, but as someone unmoored by regret. She hesitated, then agreed. They met in a quiet park just after sunrise, the world still drowsy, fog curling around the swings and empty benches like ghosts of choices never made. She arrived with her guard up and her heart caged in armor he had unknowingly forged. The triplets weren't with her this time, it was just her, and a silence so thick it swallowed the morning breeze. Alexander didn't waste time. He asked what had haunted him all night. "Why didn't you tell me?" And in that moment Sarah's expression cracked, not with vulnerability, but with the exhaustion of someone who had carried too much truth for too long. Her voice was steady, but her fingers twitched at her sides, betraying the storm beneath. "I tried," she said. "I called, I wrote, I begged your assistant to pass on messages. She looked me in the eyes and told me you didn't care, that you had moved on. that you were already seeing someone else. Alexander's jaw clenched, each word slicing into him like broken glass. He remembered how tightly his assistant had managed his life, how she guarded his schedule like a fortress, and now he realized it had never been loyalty. It had been sabotage. Sarah took a shaky breath and looked at the sky, as if trying to find the strength in something bigger than both of them. I waited for weeks, she continued, her voice brittle. I still hoped. Even after the pregnancy tests, even after I started showing, even after I was alone in a cold hospital room, delivering 3 tiny lives. I waited. Alexander's hands curled into fists, not at her, but at himself, at the man he used to be, at the version of him who didn't question why the letters stopped coming. She looked at him now not like a lover, but like a war survivor, bruised, not broken. Do you know what it's like to rock 3 babies to sleep on a train bench? She asked, her eyes burning. To sell your last coat for formula? To smile at your children while skipping meals yourself? He blinked back the burn in his throat, his $1,000,000 life suddenly feeling worthless in the shadow of her strength. I would have come back, he said, barely a whisper. I would have dropped everything if I had known. She nodded slowly, a bitter smile dancing at the edge of her lips. I know that now, but back then all I had was silence, and silence felt like your answer. He stepped forward, desperate to reach her, to close the distance carved by time and lies, but she stepped back. You replaced love with pride, she said, and her words hit him harder than any slap. You didn't even question why I disappeared. You just kept climbing, assuming I was beneath you. Shame crept into his bones like frost. He wanted to scream, to blame someone, to erase the years they lost, but there was no undoing absence. I'm not here to beg, she continued, folding her arms. I've built a life from scraps. I don't need a savior. I needed a partner. And you weren't there. He searched her face for a crack, a signal, a flicker of the girl who once traced constellations on his chest and whispered dreams into the dark. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She was steel. He finally said, let me fix this. The words sounded hollow even to him, but they were all he had. Her eyes met his, sharp, unflinching. You can't fix the past, she said. But you can prove you're not the man who vanished. He nodded, swallowing the lump of guilt lodged in his throat. Rage bubbled inside him, not at her, never at her, but at the time they'd lost, at the betrayal that robbed his children of a father and her of peace. He wanted to fight now, for them, for her. But Sarah didn't need promises, she needed proof. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over her face, he realized something terrifying. He had built an empire, but he didn't know how to rebuild trust. And the woman in front of him held his future, not in her hands, but in her ability to believe he could change. The moment Sarah walked away from that park bench, leaving Alexander with nothing but her truth and his trembling heart, he knew he was standing at the edge of a precipice, not just of regret but of rebirth. That same afternoon he called her again, not with apologies this time, but with an offer. A job that matched her intellect, a home to shelter her children, and a promise to right every wrong he'd unknowingly been a part of. But Sarah, standing firm beneath the weight of her pride and pain, didn't hesitate before answering. I didn't come here to be saved, she said, eyes steady as stone. I came to be seen. Her words hit deeper than anything he'd ever heard in a boardroom, and instead of feeling rejected, he felt humbled. For the first time, someone wasn't impressed by his net worth, but by his willingness to change. So he didn't push. He showed up differently. No grand gestures, no pity, just presence. He visited the kids at the community center where Sarah volunteered, sitting on tiny chairs with sticky fingers tugging at his sleeves, listening to stories about dinosaurs and invisible monsters. Jack warmed to him first, drawn to the gentleness in Alexander's hands. Jill followed, asking if she could braid his hair like her doll's. And Jim, ever the quiet one, simply leaned against him one afternoon and didn't move. Alexander felt it then, that unfamiliar swell in his chest. That wasn't pride or ambition, but something more delicate, belonging. Sarah watched with cautious eyes as he returned day after day, helping with snacks, staying through tantrums, wiping tears, tying shoes. and slowly the cracks in her armor began to soften. She laughed once unexpectedly when Alexander tried to assemble a toy kitchen and ended up with 3 extra pieces and a bruised thumb. That laugh, it undid him. It reminded him of who they were before the world hardened them. He wasn't trying to win her back with wealth. He was trying to earn her trust with time. The triplets began to ask for him, and Sarah began to expect him. Her smiles came more easily. Her shoulders dropped when he entered a room. And one night, as he helped her carry grocery bags up a narrow staircase, she let him in, not just into her apartment, but into the living room of her guarded heart. They sat on a second-hand couch, surrounded by crayon drawings and warmth, and she told him about the nights she'd nearly given up, the letters she wrote but never sent, the pain of watching birthdays pass without balloons because rent came first. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened. And in that silence, something began to heal. Alexander changed, not by force but by witnessing. He stopped barking at assistants. He started asking names. He brought snacks to team meetings. His employees noticed it. His board questioned it. But he didn't care because, for the first time, he was building something that couldn't be measured in stocks. And just as that fragile thread of peace began weaving through their lives, the storm returned. It arrived in red heels and venom-laced smiles. His ex-fiancée, Cassandra, the very woman who had intercepted Sarah's messages and stolen years from all of them. She walked into his office like a shadow from a life he wanted to forget, holding a folder of secrets and leverage. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice syrupy. "This little family fantasy, it's built on lies. And I can prove it." Alexander felt the floor tilt beneath him as she laid out documents, twisted facts, and manipulative narratives meant to fracture everything he was rebuilding. "One word," she warned, "and your shareholders will know about your illegitimate kids, your dirty secrets, your soft heart. And we both know how Wall Street treats sentiment." But he wasn't the same man she once controlled. Rage lit behind his eyes, not just for what she was doing now, but for what she stole then. She had cost him birthdays, first steps, lullabies, and kisses he never got to place on tiny foreheads. Still, the damage had been done. Sarah sensed the shift before he even told her. She saw the hesitation in his eyes, the distance in his voice. And just when she had begun to trust again, to lean into something real, the past returned like a thief in the night, threatening the fragile world they had stitched together with trembling hands. Would he fight for them, or would fear win again? The night of the gala shimmered with elegance and ego, crystal chandeliers casting golden halos over gowns and tuxedos, the ballroom pulsing with polite laughter and whispered ambition. But beneath the glittering surface, a storm waited to shatter everything. Sarah arrived in a modest black dress borrowed from a friend. Her hair curled softly around her shoulders, heart pounding not from nerves, but from the dread of secrets unraveling under spotlight. Alexander stood tall beside her, his tailored suit sharp, his hand warm against hers, but his eyes scanning the crowd like a soldier entering battle. Cassandra was already there, draped in designer malice, holding court with a smile so rehearsed it cracked at the edges. The moment the microphones turned on and the cameras shifted their gaze, she struck, stepping onto the stage with a casual cruelty only the privileged could weaponize. "I believe transparency is important," she said sweetly, as if her words weren't bombs. "Before you all applaud this reformed CEO, maybe ask him about the woman he abandoned, the children no one knew about, the life he conveniently forgot." Gasps rippled through the room. Flashbulbs exploded. Voices rose in accusation and disbelief. Reporters surged forward like vultures, questions tumbling over each other. "Mr. Johnson, is it true? Are those your illegitimate children? Did you lie to your shareholders?" For a heartbeat, the world went still. And then Alexander stepped forward, not with shame but with absolute clarity, pulling Sarah beside him so the world could finally see what mattered. "Yes," he said, his voice unwavering, echoing across marble and scandal. "They are my children. She's the woman I love. And I won't apologize for discovering too late what truly matters." The silence that followed was deafening. Then shattered by a flood of camera clicks and murmurs. Cassandra's smile faltered. This wasn't the reaction she expected. But Alexander wasn't done. I lost them once because I trusted the wrong people, he continued, glancing at Sarah with a quiet plea in his eyes. But I'm not losing them again. No title, no empire, no headline is worth more than the chance to be the father they deserve, and the man she once believed in. And with that, he removed the mic, walked off the stage, and in front of everyone, board members, billionaires, paparazzi, he kissed Sarah's trembling hand and whispered, "Come with me." Outside, beneath the cool breath of the city and its endless blinking lights, he took a deep breath and made the decision that would change everything. He resigned. On the spot. No press statement, no PR spin. Just the truth, raw and defiant. I'm stepping down, he told his stunned assistant. My company can find another leader, but my children only have one father, and I'm done being absent. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she had held back for years, not of pain, but of disbelief, of release. In that moment, the man before her wasn't a CEO or a savior. He was the boy she once loved, grown up, battle-scarred, humbled. Not perfect, but real. The children ran up from the limo where a nanny had waited, Jill squealing. Jack holding up a drawing of a family with 4 smiling stick figures and a dog. Jim ran straight into Alexander's arms, burying his face in his chest like it belonged there all along. Sarah reached for Alexander's hand, intertwining their fingers not out of obligation, but out of hope, fragile, trembling, reborn. "Are you sure?" she whispered. And he nodded. "For the first time in my life." As the crowd spilled out behind them and headlines raced to catch up, they stood still beneath the neon glow of the city, the same city that once tore them apart, now wrapping them in its lights like a second chance. Then, like a scene from a movie fate had been rewriting for years, Sarah leaned in and kissed him, soft, certain, shattering every wall they had built between them. The children cheered. Jack clapped. Jill tried to snap a picture with Alexander's phone. Jim just grinned, whispering, "Daddy." And in that moment, time paused. Not because life would now be easy, or love would be flawless, but because they had chosen each other fully, finally. And the world could watch, judge, or forget, but they were no longer hiding. Because love, when true, doesn't bow to pressure. It breaks through it, and sometimes, after all the storms and silence, it finds its way home, not as a fantasy, but as a fierce, flawed, and beautiful truth.